Good afternoon, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. So these talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead. I'm a white man in my very late 30s at this point, with long hair and beard. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday. This is your chance to spend some time in the space, hot desk alongside our residents from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio. Anyone who's new to the studio, put your hand up. Welcome to you. Rest of you have probably heard this bit before, but I'm going to do it anyway. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We are a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol. And we offer studio space, desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities to our residents, all for free as a part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make time for collaboration. Now, quick bit of housekeeping. Feel free to move around, make a cup of tea in the kitchen just back here, grab a glass of water. Please don't use the microwave, it interferes with the induction loop. We do have a quiet space through that wall just here, like around the corner, so if you need to take a break at any point, just pop in there. Fire exits are at either end of the studio. If you hear a fire alarm, we don't have anything planned, that's real. So, please follow a member of the studio team who will direct you to the fire exits. And accessible toilets, including baby change, can be found in the corridor just over there next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. For those of you who are watching online, you can pop your questions into the YouTube chat. We'll pull those out. If you're in the building, just raise your hand in the old-fashioned way. We'll send a mic around and you can do it the old-fashioned way. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social if Twitter collapses in the next 20 minutes. Whatever suits you best. But now I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Harriet Horobin-Worley is a creative software engineer who's interested in building low-tech tools and collaborative experiences. As part of the Control Shift Festival and a residency with Container Magazine, they've been working on a project to grow their own web server, build HTML gardens, and to help us reflect on our place in the ecosystem of technology. So please, if you'll all join me in giving a warm welcome to Harriet.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about a project which I've been doing to hopefully answer this question, can a website be a garden? This project, as Martin said, it was commissioned by Control Shift and Container Magazine. Control Shift have some amazing events coming up in March, and Container Mag has some awesome stuff. They both do amazing work around arts and technology, so definitely check them out. So the story of this project begins last summer when I first started to garden for the first time. I had a really small courtyard garden with just 2 raised beds, and I started growing vegetables in them. And it became like a really emotional journey for me. I was so excited to watch the seedlings grow, and I was really excited to check them every day, see what changes had happened. And I was so fascinated by how something so small and dry and dull as a little seed could kind of burst forth into this life and abundance just by changing the conditions that it was in. And what I also noticed when I was gardening was the huge range of insects that were coming into the garden and the kind of unexpected stuff that happened, the wildflowers that were cropping up in the gaps of the paving stones and the weeds that would grow. And it was so joyful to see these caterpillars and beetles and bees visiting the plants that I'd grown, and it was really humbling. And it was really cool to see how just doing this small bit of cultivation could affect the ecosystem that I was in. And I think it made me realize that I had a growing awareness of the systems that I was in, both kind of man-made and natural. And to be honest, I'd never really thought about how something like a tomato seed or a tomato plant goes from the farm to the Aldi down the road to my plate. And I was suddenly aware of those systems or thinking about them more. Yeah, it was really interesting. And I began to kind of write about the experience, and I wanted to share the experience and share like pictures of my garden with people in an artwork online, because I'm a digital artist. And that got me thinking about the internet. If I'm going to put something on the internet, it's this other ecosystem that I'm inextricably enmeshed in. And it kind of is a bit like the mycelium networks that exist invisibly below, like forests and fields. There's this hidden network behind all of the digital products that we interact with. It's just a nice kind of stock photo of like a data center. And I wasn't even aware, my day job is a software engineer, but I wasn't even aware, literally, what's going on in these buildings, how does it get from here to my computer screen, over the internet. And the ideas that I was kind of collecting around the garden and collecting around the internet, for me, these are really inextricably linked. Because the choices that we're making around our technology are impacting the natural environment, inescapably, from the mobile phones that we replace every 2 years, to the big data centers that are being built, to the social networks that define our relationships and define what we spend our time on Earth thinking about. And what I was coming to realize was that the material reality of the web is really abstracted. We have the idea of the cloud, which is an amazing branding exercise for essentially huge buildings like this and huge companies with real servers being maintained by real people. And I think with the climate emergency upon us, and with things like billionaires buying social networks, that we can see that abstraction can result in real problems. And here's just a really basic diagram that I wanted to show how things travel through the internet. So they go from a server, and there's a domain name. I forgot what the S stands for. System, yeah, which is a big phone book for websites where a URL should point to. And then that eventually gets to your computer, through your internet service provider and your modem. So I wanted to create something that was online, but I wanted the production of it to reflect its content. So I started to look into what low-tech solutions could I use to be more sustainable, but also what DIY solutions could I use. So would it be possible to divest from that pipeline and to not use Amazon Web Services, for instance? And this is kind of what I sort of plugged into it, was that I started to run my own DIY server on a Raspberry Pi, which is a small microchip controller. And it lives in a little box in my house, and it sits blinking next to my desk. And I really love the idea that someone is connecting to this, and they're connecting to something that I've built. And it's something that I can tend to, I tend to my garden, I can tidy it up, I can protect it, and I can update it as the seasons change. And I can really have a relationship to this server that is kind of in this tend and befriend mode. It's a loving and nurturing relationship that I might have to a scarf that you've knitted, or a meal that you've cooked, or a vegetable patch that you've grown. So I talked a little bit about the kind of network infrastructure, and that's kind of what I see as the landscape, or the soil that the garden's growing in. And then I wanted to look at what I was going to plant in that soil. And I mentioned that I'd researched low-tech solutions. I wanted to create a site that was using as little electricity as possible, using as little computational power. And I wanted to understand how to build a website from the ground up. So if anyone is a web developer, you'll know there's a lot of abstractions and frameworks and libraries around websites now that make them very large to run. And what I did was create a little HTML interactive poem that you can view at poem.garden. And there we go. And I won't go through it all here, but yeah, you can kind of click through and like see the images. And it was kind of it's like a nice, slow, kind of thoughtful digital project to click through. And previously, I've like worked in VR and mobile apps, and what I found really frustrating with them was like they're not very accessible, and they're not very like you can't archive them well. Like things that I've made like a year ago are now completely obsolete because the hardware doesn't exist or the software's broken. So it was really interesting to be like going back to these really old building blocks of the web from like the 90s that are still working and still really accessible. So that was the first part of this project. And before I get on to the second part, I just wanted to do a little tour of the things that really excited me as I was researching this project, and just a shout out to a few things that I thought were super interesting. So cyberfeminism is a movement that has been influencing me like throughout my work, but especially for this. And the internet has this incredibly rich legacy and history of cultural movements and artists and individuals that have always been advocating for slow tech or like challenging the normal modes of big technology. Cyberfeminism is a movement from the 1990s, and VNS Matrix is one of the collectives that started in Australia that are still making art about this and challenging. I really loved their phrase here, like Big Daddy Mainframe, and I think they were already seeing like the kind of like the sort of the capitalist and patriarchal kind of influences on the internet, which they saw the potential for it to be this kind of psychosexual place where you could transcend gender, you could transcend identity, and it could have been this really utopian network, but instead it's Big Daddy Mainframe has kind of fucked it all up. But Mindy Sue is an artist who's still kind of carrying on this tradition, and she's just published a Cyberfeminism Index book, which is doing the work to kind of highlight and archive some of this cyberfeminism movement. Another point of inspiration for this was the Feminist Server Manifesto. This was written by a collective, started at the Art Meets Radical Openness conference. And it really chimed with me, like these, a couple of the points here, like that a server is a situated technology, and it's seen as part of a context and part of an ecosystem, and that it has an awareness of the materiality, not just of the software, but the people that are maintaining it, which I think is in direct opposition to those AWS data centers and stuff, where everything's completely anonymous and abstracted and hidden. I really like the idea of challenging with a kind of climate consciousness. Like, does a website have to be up all the time? Like, does it have to be fast? Does it have to be available everywhere? And today, if we were challenged that, thinking about what we would serve. Another essay that I came across as I was researching is by the writer Maggie Appleton, and this is a really amazing collection of like the history of digital gardening and how things like blogs and like personal sites from like back in the day, like, if anyone was on MySpace, there was kind of this more attitude to the internet of you had a little kind of patch that you were tending yourself, and you had a bit of ownership and kind of creativity about it. And that's like in opposition to the kind of metaphor of the stream, which I think is how a lot of people engage with the internet now. Like, we have the social feeds coming through, and it's kind of this hosepipe of information. It's really interesting. And another resource to shout out is Low Tech magazine. They actually not only run it on a DIY server, but it's a solar-powered server. And it's really cool that you can see on the website how much battery the server has and like what the weather is like in the place that it is. So you'll know whether the site is going to be up or down. You can kind of predict that. Yeah, I thought that was really awesome. And then finally, I just wanted to give a shout out to Careful Networks, which is a collection of works that's it's not even hosted on the internet, so it's hosted on like a peer-to-peer network. So they're using something called the Hyper protocol, I think it is, and a Beaker browser, and you can access the artworks like through individuals' computers. So it's like completely divesting from the infrastructure that we're used to and that is kind of owned by big corporations, and it's really awesome. Yeah, so to talk about the second part of this project, in November, as part of the Control Shift Festival, we ran a workshop with about 10 to 12 people. It was here in the PM studio. Shout out to the PM studio, they're great. And we talked a little bit about kind of what I've talked about here, like how the internet is made and how we interact with websites. And we looked at some like low-tech solutions and some like building blocks for how to create like a really simple what we were calling like HTML allotments. And yeah, I asked the participants to bring a collection of images that they wanted to plant into the mycelium network of the internet. And together we built our own web pages using like a kind of template and looking like stripping it back to basics, so like really simple HTML and CSS that can still be really effective visually. And I really enjoyed the process of this, and I think the attendees did as well. For me, it felt more like getting together in like a knitting circle or cooking a meal with friends. And I think it really highlighted to me that coding slowly or kind of hand-rolling elements, it fosters that tend and befriend mentality, and it allowed us to like share and inspire each other. Yeah, I'll show maybe a few of the websites that we made. So this is htmlpoem.com. And there's some really, really cute ones. Someone bought a collection of like gloves that they'd found on the street and displayed them there. And there's a really cool one where the artists use like CSS to kind of highlight animals with your mouse. So it's kind of like you're exploring like the deep sea and like finding these creatures. Yeah, and it's super cute. Yeah, there's just some pictures of the workshop and a few more examples. Yeah, and it was really great to see how everyone like put their own stamp on like the designs and the collections that they wanted to bring to it and share with people. It was a really great exercise. Yeah, and for me, this workshop, it really cemented to me like this kind of manifesto that I want to come out of this project, which is that the tech industry wants us to think of the internet in a certain way, that it must inevitably work in a certain way. But what if those assumptions are wrong? And I think it's more important than ever that we challenge the ideologies of like growth and expansion that rely on environmental damage. I don't think that it's feasible that like everyone should own their own server or hand roll their own websites, just like it would be impossible for us all to like grow our own food. But I think if you want to like plug into the matrix, it's a good idea to understand how that matrix is built and to develop the tools that we might need to change it. And as we figure out how to flourish and blossom in the margins of capitalism, I think digital creation should have its place alongside other kind of tangible crafts, like tending to a garden, knitting a scarf, or like baking bread. I think building a website can be an act of cultivation for yourself and for your community. Cool, so what's next for the project? I've got an essay coming out on Container Magazine, which kind of goes into a bit more detail, the stuff that I've talked about here. And in March, at the end of March, there's going to be a weekender with Control Shift, where the websites will be on display, and there's some amazing other artists as part of that weekender. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it'd be great to hear any questions. So.
All right, well, as we said, if you are watching online, please stick your questions in the YouTube chat. In the room, stick your hand in the air. Bring the microphone down. You will not be able to hear the microphone. It is working. It's for the online people.
I'm just curious about the running your own pi. Did you do any sort of basic calculations to work out if that is more efficient than hosting it in AWS in terms of energy?
I didn't, yeah. I was wondering if anyone was going to challenge that, because I was thinking about it. It's like, is this actually more environmentally friendly? Yeah. And it might, I mean, it probably isn't, because...
Yeah, your point on, like, writing good efficient websites in plain HTML, totally, yes. But I think, when you actually start to... I mean, I reckon it costs about €5 a year in electricity costs to run a Pi Zero at home.
Yeah,
so 2 watts. And my website on Amazon cost me 80 pence or 80 cents last year in hosting.
Yeah, I think...
So unless they're making a huge loss on their energy bill.
I think also... I didn't want to buy anything new. Like, I already had a Raspberry Pi, and I think if you just like get a new Raspberry Pi to run every single website, it wouldn't be efficient as well.
It's an interesting idea, but I think the energy thing, it definitely highlights the need to like be more efficient in what you develop in your code by running on a really small constrained device. I guess for me it was. But then actually you could put that into the cloud, and actually it would probably be a better. In the same way that kind of cities are more efficient sometimes than people living isolated in rural areas. But I think for me it was, the server was less about the, like literally using less energy and more kind of divesting from that big tech. Like, because Amazon. The ownership and the control and stuff is like I didn't want the money to go to Amazon, I guess. And I think that I guess we don't know how carbon neutral the way that they build their servers are, like, and their buildings, and the way they run them and staff them as well. So yeah, I think it was like, how can I divest from that really and have it? The big one at the same time is heat. They produce as much energy to cool. And the interesting thing with running it at home is that heat isn't necessarily wasted because that Pi is mostly producing heat. That's heating your house. And
it's also like the actual architecture of like the buildings, like where they're often obviously built in kind of areas that affect then the natural environment where they're built as well. So I think it's like a really interesting question. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Harriet. I was just thinking
hold the microphone to your mouth.
Sorry, like that?
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about why we don't tend to our websites, because I think it's a really common thing that people feel like they abandon them and they're out of date, and why we would tend to them, and I think it just makes me think about how increasingly things are done for us. So, like Squarespace or WordPress give us all these templates, so we're really removed from, like you say, the process. We haven't seen it grow, so we don't feel the same tenderness to things which we haven't seen develop. Like Lego, like I think about that a lot with Lego, that it's all kits now, and we're like really removed from the process of the thing actually from a dull seed, like you say, how it's sort of becoming something. So it's just an observation.
Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting, because I think those tools are really helpful, and they allow people that don't have coding knowledge to create stuff, which is amazing. And I think it's not for everyone to like code, and it is a bit of a pain to have to go and like to update stuff if you don't have those tools. But yeah, I think we kind of have lost something, but I don't want to sound too nostalgic for like the old ways as well, because I think, I think the tools that have come up have been really amazing and helpful for people. But yeah, I think it's interesting because we think that the new generation has more digital literacy, but actually, because so many kids are growing up with iPads, and that is so abstracted, there is actually a big gap. Like a lot of kids coming in to do computer science at university, they don't know about folder structures and things like that, and it's like this huge kind of paradigm shift for them to start to think about, how these old kind of metaphors for how computers are built and made. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Thanks, Harriet. That's great. Two questions. First one, sort of following on from that. If people were thinking that they would actually, maybe they've never tried anything like this before, but they'd like to, and you were saying about how the workshop felt like a kind of, sort of knitting circle or anything. Is there any groups, either virtual or kind of in the nearby, that you would recommend that people could go to? That's the first question, super practical one. And then the other question, you mentioned at the end that like it wouldn't be feasible like for everyone to grow their own food or for everyone to be doing this. But in your like absolute dream version of the future, you hinted at it by showing some references. But what would your dream version look like of like what is this ecosystem, or what is websites?
Yeah, wow, that's a good question. For the first one is, if you're interested in learning about this stuff, there is a really great group called Code Bar that meet up, I think once a week or once a month. They have online and in-person events where you can go and chat to people about coding, and it's really low-key, like easy way to get involved. And there's tons of resources online, and I'm actually going to write a zine with the tech details about how I set up the server, because it's quite daunting when you start looking at it. I was like, I don't even know what a port is. Like, and then in terms of what I would want the future to be like, I think I hadn't even dared to like envision anything, because like, I don't know, I think it would be great if we didn't have to rely on Amazon for like 60% of all web hosting, or Google or Microsoft. And I think, I don't know, I think Gen Z will like sort it all out. I think they've, I'm just going to defer to them, because I think they're already like seeing the dangers of social media and like seeing how the algorithms are like affecting their lives. I think it would be cool if I could take one thing into the future, is like challenging the idea that of scale, and like that websites have to be available all the time, or that websites have to be really snazzy and whizzy, and and to maybe think about kind of low tech solutions a bit more.
We have a question from YouTube.
Hey, thanks. This one's from Ruth, who's watching online. Ruth says, the solar-powered website that interacts with local weather is really cool. Have you looked at ways of engaging with the weather or the seasons on your garden site?
Yeah, I think that would be really awesome. Thanks for that question. I think I did think about it, and I looked into like solar panels at least, but it was like I wanted to get second-hand ones, because I think, again, there's like the actual literal like carbon neutrality of it. Like if you're going to get new solar powers, it won't be efficient for like 100 years. I thought it'd be really cool to, like based on what the weather is like in my garden, like change what plants are growing, or change like the colors or the contents. And I'd really like to kind of keep it updated like through the season. So like maybe have like a winter season, and then a spring, and then a summer. And then it would kind of have, be this long-term like art project that you could visit at different times. So that would be really cool.
Got another one from Zoanda Street. And Zoanda asks, what language do you prefer for this kind of low-tech, small internet stuff?
HTML, I don't think it's like technically like a programming language. It's like something that you mark up text with. But that is super powerful with CSS. Those are the kind of two. And then like a bit of JavaScript, thrown in there to do some like, that kind of can do like more like interactive things, or to make stuff happen. But those are my two faves.
Any more questions from the room? I wanted to ask something actually. I was wondering, you work as a professional software developer when you're not doing all of this. Is there anything, what are you taking forward from this into that more commercial world of apps and websites? And
Yeah, I think it's actually been really interesting, like how it's informed my day job. So I am doing like more infrastructure stuff, and so it's been really cool to like at least now know like what's happening when I'm starting to work with AWS and serve sites on it, because it's like the industry standard is the Amazon Web Services, as well as like Microsoft and Google's offerings. But what I've really taken from it is the accessibility side. So I do like work on government and public-facing projects, and we want to include everyone, and that could mean someone that can't run JavaScript on whatever device they're running. So they might be on a really old phone or a really old tablet, and actually the low-tech solutions are often the most accessible and the ones that work like across different devices. So yeah, I think being aware of that is super important. Yeah.
We got one more from YouTube.
This one's from Lawrence, and Lawrence asks, how did you personally get started in coding and programming?
So I come from more of an arts background. So I did like English at university about 12 years ago, and I worked in digital publishing. So it was kind of when the iPad was new and exciting. We were thinking about what would books look like on an iPad. It turns out they just kind of look like books, but yeah. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll look at video games. And I was living in Toronto in Canada, and I got involved in like the indie games scene there. And I started to pick up programming just to code like games with Unity, which is a framework that kind of you can make 2D and 3D games in. And it was so exciting to see like I tried a bit of web development. I was like, this is boring. I'm just making boxes. I'm just making sites. And then to do it with games was like super exciting, because you could see stuff move around and you could interact with it. Yeah, and then I kind of taught myself to code and managed to get kind of a little junior job, and then been kind of learning ever since.
Any more questions from anyone? There we go.
I've noticed that both of your websites have poems in their domains. Why is that, and how does poetry kind of relate to your work?
Yeah, so I think I wanted to call them poems because I didn't like any of the other words that are often used for like interactive digital art, like interactives, or it's not a game, and it's not like an interactive fiction piece. So I don't have like a very sort of artsy answer for like why I use poetry, but I think that I wanted to capture that idea that it was kind of self-contained, and that it was like a little vignette that's like painting a little portrait, and that it was that it had been made thoughtfully, and that like the code I see as like the poetry as well as the content, because I'd kind of written out the code, and it's meant to be beautiful in the way that it's structured as well as what it's conveying, I guess. So yeah.
Great. Anybody else? In which case, I will say thank you, Harriet.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
And before you all go, a reminder, please do take a look at our website. We've got a whole range of great events coming up, leading up to our 15th birthday celebration, which is on the 3rd of February. It's going to be great. It's going to be lots of exciting work from the past decade and a half at the studio. More details on that are on the website, because I can't remember them off the top of my head. If you want to stick around in Hot Desk today, then or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team. Studio team, hands in the air. Loughton, put your hand in the air. We're a little thin on the ground today, but we will be around to help you. If you're watching online, drop us an email, studio@watershed.co.uk. Any questions, we'll sort you out. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you all next time.